Most people play the game of wealth to buy their freedom, but the true elite play it to conquer the board entirely. They do not merely seek to accumulate money. They seek to construct what we will call the economic fortress. This fortress is the physical, undeniable creation of wealth through unassailable market dominance and absolute centralization of capital. It is a structure built so wide and so deep that no competitor, no market shift, and no economic winter can breach its walls. To understand the architectural blueprint of this fortress, we must study the most ruthless and efficient wealth-generating engine in human history. We must look to John D. Rockefeller Sr. and the monopolistic empire of Standard Oil. The construction of an economic fortress begins with a singular, aggressive focus on capital accumulation and sector monopolization. Rockefeller understood a foundational truth that most modern entrepreneurs ignore. You do not build empire-level wealth by diversifying early. You build it by identifying a single, scalable industry and aggressively centralizing your control over every moving part within it. In the late 19th century, the oil refining industry was a chaotic, highly fragmented landscape filled with wildcatters and small-time operators fighting for scraps. Rockefeller did not view this as a market to participate in. He viewed it as a chaotic territory that desperately required a sovereign ruler. He realized that true wealth was not generated by competing fairly, but by engineering a scenario where competition became mathematically impossible. This philosophy culminated in one of the most ruthless and brilliant maneuvers in business history, the Cleveland Massacre of 1872. At the time, Cleveland, Ohio, was the beating heart of the American oil refining industry, home to 26 fiercely independent competitors. Rockefeller knew that a direct, head-to-head price war would bleed his own capital and slow the construction of his fortress. Instead, he orchestrated a masterclass in strategic leverage by secretly architecting the South Improvement Company. This was not a refining company, but a shadowy alliance between Standard Oil and the major railroad syndicates that controlled the transportation of oil out of Cleveland. Through the South Improvement Company, Rockefeller negotiated a secret system of rebates and drawbacks that fundamentally broke the free market. He didn't just secure massive freight discounts for his own Standard Oil shipments. He weaponized the supply chain against his rivals. Rockefeller forced the railroads to pay him a percentage of the freight costs that his competitors paid to ship their own oil. Every time a rival shipped a barrel, they were unknowingly subsidizing Standard Oil's expansion. This is the ultimate modern entrepreneurial principle of capturing market share. You do not win by having a slightly better product. You win by acquiring unparalleled leverage over the fundamental supply chain. Armed with this lethal, hidden economic advantage, Rockefeller executed his acquisition strike with terrifying precision. He systematically approached his Cleveland rivals, sat them down, and quietly revealed the South Improvement Company contracts. He showed them the raw mathematics of their impending doom, offering them a simple, cold ultimatum. They could sell their refineries to Standard Oil in exchange for cash at a fire sale valuation, or they could take Standard Oil stock, effectively surrendering their independence to join his fortress. If they refused both, he promised to crush them into bankruptcy using his insurmountable freight advantage. The results of this aggressive centralization were staggering and swift. In a span of exactly 6 weeks, Rockefeller bought out 22 of his 26 competitors in Cleveland. The Cleveland Massacre was not a bloody physical conflict, but a ruthless, bloodless acquisition of market share that transformed Standard Oil from a major player into an absolute monopoly. For the modern entrepreneur, the lesson here is profound and highly actionable. To build your own economic fortress, you must identify the choke points in your industry, whether that is customer acquisition channels, proprietary technology, or raw material sourcing, and aggressively leverage them to acquire competitors or force them out of the market entirely. With the competition eradicated, Rockefeller shifted his focus to the internal fortification of his empire through extreme vertical integration. He recognized that every time a third-party vendor touched his product, they extracted a profit margin that rightfully belonged inside his fortress walls. Standard Oil refused to be held hostage by the fluctuating prices of independent barrel makers who frequently disrupted the supply chain. Rockefeller's solution was to completely eliminate the middleman by absorbing the entire production ecosystem. Standard Oil bought its own tracts of white oak timber, built its own drying kilns, and manufactured its own barrels, slashing the cost per barrel from $2.50 to less than $1. This obsession with owning the infrastructure did not stop at wooden barrels. Rockefeller systematically purchased the horse-drawn wagons, the warehouses, the chemical plants that produced the sulfuric acid needed for refining, and eventually the massive network of underground pipelines. By controlling the pipeline infrastructure, he completely bypassed the very railroads he had initially used to gain power, securing total sovereignty over his products' journey from the earth to the consumer. This is the exact blueprint for building a proprietary, cash-flowing business ecosystem today. The modern equivalent is the entrepreneur who stops renting third-party software, builds their own internal tech stack, owns their direct-to-consumer distribution lists, and controls the customer journey end-to-end to maximize profit margins. To maintain the structural integrity of this massive operation, Rockefeller implemented a system of hyper-efficient operational accounting. He was famously obsessed with the granular mathematics of his business, tracking costs down to the thousandth of a cent. He knew exactly how many drops of solder were required to seal a tin can of oil, and when he discovered that 39 drops would hold the seal just as well as 40, he mandated the reduction across his entire global operation. In the first year alone, that single drop of solder saved Standard Oil thousands of dollars, capital that was immediately redirected back into the war chest. This level of operational accounting is mandatory for anyone seeking to build generational wealth. If you do not ruthlessly police your profit margins, your fortress will slowly bleed out from 1,000 microscopic cuts. The capital generated by this hyper-efficient, vertically integrated monopoly was staggering, but Rockefeller's true genius lay in his strict dividend reinvestment policies. In the early and middle stages of building Standard Oil, he famously restricted the payout of large cash dividends to himself and his partners. He understood that extracting capital to fund a lavish lifestyle during the accumulation phase was equivalent to tearing down the walls of the fortress to build a luxury tent outside. Every available dollar of profit was forcefully retained and ruthlessly compounded back into the primary wealth-generating engine. This capital was used to buy more pipelines, acquire more rival refineries in other states, and continuously upgrade technology to widen the moat around Standard Oil. This brings us to one of the most dangerous traps facing modern wealth builders, the fallacy of premature diversification. Today's culture preaches the necessity of creating 7 streams of income as quickly as possible, leading entrepreneurs to divide their attention and capital across real estate, crypto, side hustles, and stocks before they have even built a single dominant business. Rockefeller's blueprint explicitly rejects this. He did not build Standard Oil while simultaneously trying to start a shoe company and a textile mill. He channeled every ounce of his intellect, leverage, and capital into sector monopolization. He dug one well, and he dug it deeper and wider than anyone else in human history until it became an unstoppable river of cash flow. Building the economic fortress requires a level of discipline and aggression that borders on the fanatical. It demands that you view your primary business not as a job, but as an empire in its infancy. You must actively seek out strategic leverage, whether through exclusive partnerships, superior data acquisition, or controlling a niche supply chain. You must have the courage to execute your own version of the Cleveland Massacre, aggressively acquiring market share and absorbing competitors when the opportunity presents itself. You must ruthlessly audit your operational accounting, stripping away inefficiencies and eliminating middlemen until your profit margins are virtually unassailable. Ultimately, the Rockefeller blueprint for the accumulation phase is about transforming a business into an autonomous, self-funding ecosystem. By owning the infrastructure, dictating the terms of the market, and relentlessly compounding the profits back into the core engine, you create a structure that generates immense, monopolistic cash flow. This is how you lay the indestructible foundation of generational wealth. But once the market is conquered, the competitors are vanquished, and the economic fortress stands complete. A new and far more complex challenge arises. For a fortress overflowing with infinite capital will inevitably attract the most dangerous sieges imaginable. The moment the accumulation phase concludes, the nature of the game fundamentally changes. A completed economic fortress, overflowing with infinite capital, immediately draws the aggressive gaze of the state, opportunistic litigants, and the insidious decay of generational entitlement. To survive this inevitable siege, the focus must pivot entirely from aggressive expansion to impenetrable intergenerational preservation. This requires the construction of what we will call the Immortal Vault, a legal and structural paradigm deliberately engineered to outlive its creator. To master this delicate transition, we must shift our historical anchor from the ruthless market conquests of the father to the bureaucratic and architectural genius of the son. John D. Rockefeller Jr. was tasked with a mission far more complex than monopolizing an industry. He had to ensure that the greatest private fortune in human history survived the newly implemented federal estate tax. In the early 20th century, he recognized that managing a fortune of this magnitude could no longer operate as a casual, disorganized family affair. He established his centralized headquarters in room 5600 at Rockefeller Center, effectively giving birth to the world's first and most sophisticated formalized single-family office. Room 5600 was not just an administrative hub. It was a sovereign financial institution dedicated exclusively to the preservation, governance, and strategic deployment of family capital. This office employed a private army of the world's sharpest legal minds, tax strategists, and investment managers, completely isolating the wealth from traditional, external financial systems. The ultimate genius of Room 5600 lay in its ability to institutionalize family governance, removing the emotional volatility that typically destroys inherited wealth. Rockefeller Jr. understood the painful reality that bloodline alone does not qualify a descendant to manage a sprawling financial empire. He engineered a sophisticated system where family members were treated as beneficiaries of a highly structured enterprise, rather than direct operators with unrestricted access to the treasury. This structural separation of ownership from control is the ultimate secret to breaking the historical curse of losing the family fortune within 3 generations. By centralizing all critical decision-making within a professional board, Jr. guaranteed that the inevitable incompetence or financial recklessness of any single heir could never breach the vault. The operational core of this immortal vault was officially forged in the legendary Rockefeller Trusts of 1934, representing a true masterclass in aggressive wealth shielding. Anticipating the devastating impact of rapidly rising estate taxes, Rockefeller Jr. moved massive blocks of wealth into heavily fortified generation-skipping transfer, or GSD, trusts. These irrevocable corporate structures were brilliantly designed to legally bypass his immediate children, transferring the core principle directly to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. By skipping a generation, the family legally circumvented the catastrophic estate taxes that would have otherwise triggered a massive liquidation of their assets upon the death of each successive heir. The immense wealth remained safely locked inside the trust wrapper, compounding tax-free, while the immediate descendants were only granted access to the highly regulated income it generated. To further fortify the immortal vault against the sieges of litigation and heir incompetence, Jr. weaponized strict spendthrift clauses within these foundational trust documents. A spendthrift provision acts as an impenetrable legal firewall, explicitly preventing a beneficiary from ever pledging their future trust income as collateral for personal debts. If a descendant made a catastrophic business decision, divorced a hostile spouse, or was targeted by a predatory lawsuit, the creditors were legally barred from piercing the trust to satisfy the judgment. The capital belonged solely to the trust, an artificial entity completely separate from the individual heir's personal liabilities and poor decisions. This mechanism ensured that no matter how foolishly a descendant behaved, they could only ruin their personal bank accounts, never the foundational wealth of the empire. Beyond the private trusts, the family deployed one of the most brilliant and widely misunderstood strategies in the history of private wealth management: the massive, formalized philanthropic vehicle. The establishment of the Rockefeller Foundation is often viewed by the public purely through the lens of historical charity, but structurally, it served as a formidable defensive mechanism. By transferring vast portions of their wealth into a tax-exempt foundation, the family successfully shielded billions of dollars from aggressive government extraction. The capital was legally donated, meaning it could no longer be taxed by the state, yet the family retained absolute control over the foundation's powerful board of directors. This dual-purpose structure allowed the Rockefellers to effectively redirect what would have been massive tax payments into a private institution that they completely commanded. While the state was deprived of its revenue, the family utilized the foundation's immense capital to shape global public health initiatives, fund major educational institutions, and influence international policy. It simultaneously solved their greatest tax liabilities while massively expanding their socio-political footprint on a global scale. The foundation transformed the family from mere industrialists into global architects, proving that giving away wealth, when structured correctly, is the ultimate method of retaining absolute control. The capital was no longer strictly financial. It was seamlessly converted into untouchable, intergenerational leverage. For the modern wealth builder, the complex mechanics of the Immortal Vault can and must be replicated, translating these billionaire strategies into actionable blueprints for your own bloodline. The first step in institutionalizing your family's wealth is the careful drafting of a legally binding family constitution. This document is not a mere mission statement. It is a rigid legal framework that dictates exactly how family capital can be accessed, who qualifies to work in the family business, and the specific philanthropic mandates future generations must follow. Just as Room 5600 set the strict rules of engagement for the Rockefellers, your family constitution acts as the governing law of your private empire. It explicitly outlines the financial penalties for heirs who violate the core principles of the vault, ensuring discipline outlives the founder. Coupled with this constitution, modern wealth preservers must establish a formalized investment board for their heirs, effectively separating the creation of wealth from its future management. You do not simply hand your children the keys to the treasury. You place the capital inside an irrevocable trust managed by a corporate trustee and a board of vetted financial advisors. The heirs must present formal business plans to this board if they wish to access capital for entrepreneurial ventures, forcing them to defend their ideas to objective professionals. This mimics the exact structural friction Rockefeller Jr. designed, ensuring that capital is only deployed into competent hands while remaining entirely shielded from personal litigation or divorce proceedings. Finally, the modern equivalent of shielding the estate from the inevitable siege of taxation involves the highly strategic utilization of high cash value life insurance. While the Rockefellers utilized complex generation-skipping trusts to bypass the estate taxes of their era, today's elite heavily fund irrevocable life insurance trusts to seamlessly absorb intergenerational tax liabilities. By overfunding a customized, dividend-paying life insurance policy, you create a massive, tax-free reservoir of immediate liquidity that pays out exactly when the government comes to collect its estate tax. This brilliant maneuver prevents the tragic, forced liquidation of family businesses or real estate portfolios simply to pay the IRS. It guarantees that the economic fortress remains entirely intact, fully capitalized, and structurally sound as it passes from one generation to the next. Building wealth is a matter of aggressive leverage and monopolistic focus, but keeping that wealth requires the cold, calculating architecture of the Immortal Vault. You must pivot from the mindset of a frontline operator to the mindset of an institutional chairman, constantly anticipating the threats of taxation, litigation, and the inevitable decay of discipline in future generations. By implementing generation-skipping trusts, utilizing dual-purpose philanthropic vehicles, and enforcing strict family governance, you ensure that your capital outlives your physical existence. You successfully transform your financial success from a temporary, single-generation victory into a permanent, undeniable legacy that commands respect for centuries. Thank you for watching this masterclass on the Rockefeller Blueprint for building and preserving generational wealth. If you found this breakdown valuable and want to continue mastering the mechanics of elite wealth building, please hit the subscribe button and join our community. Your support allows us to keep deconstructing the greatest financial strategies in history, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.